Previously on Beyond the Scanlines. I've dived into some home computer ports of the games featured in 2018's SNK 40th Anniversary Collection. It was certainly a mixed bag, ranging from average takes on regarded classics to what could be considered some utterly disastrous interpretations of not so fondly remembered titles. But now it's time to tackle the last few games in the pack to receive home computer ports. Specifically, probably the most well-known games in SNK's pre-Neo Geo output, the Ikari Warriors trilogy. This is Beyond the Scanlines, a series focusing on interesting games on classic computing and gaming platforms. Debuting in 1986, Ikari Warriors has you, and optionally a friend, on a mission to rescue your commanding officer, Colonel Cook, trapped in his HQ. Surrounded by waves of enemy soldiers, tanks, emplacements, and helicopters. It is an intense mission. Battling your way through these will take plenty of grim determination. Or credits. The one big upgrade over other run-and-gun games of the time is the ability to hop into conveniently placed tanks. These offer a short-term boost in durability and the ability to blast your way through things much, much quicker. Like Tank, the loop lever controls work excellently here, being able to rapidly change direction to focus on targets incredibly quickly, allowing you to make short work of enemy forces when you're surrounded. The journey from the arcade to the home was long, with conversions appearing on computers in both the US and Europe. Data East published these US conversions, with conversion duties handled by Quicksilver Software, and being released on the Apple II, Commodore 64, and alongside IBM PCs. Opening up with the Apple II version, and it's not the most auspicious title screen, with options for picking joystick or keyboard controls. After selection, the disc whirs away, and it's time to battle. The solo control option present means, unsurprisingly, Ikari Warriors is a solo experience here. It's not the only other thing missing though, as there's no emulation of the loop lever controls. Instead, you'll be moving about in a traditional 8-way shooter style, with the first joystick button firing your guns, and the second for throwing grenades or hopping into tanks. The one thing which bothered me when playing was that launching grenades would momentarily freeze your movement. It's a minor niggle, but when the pacing of a game like this can be fast, a pause like that can be enough to prevent you getting out of the way in time of enemy attacks. The controls do react better on the keyboard, but with the Apple II's keyboard handling, there are individual keys for each of the 8 directions, alongside firing and grenade controls. The sound isn't much to write about, but considering the Apple II's capabilities, I'm not surprised by this. They do the job in terms of communicating the basics, which is more than fine. For the visuals, it's another story. The visual elements are clear and crisp, without flicker, and whilst contained in a smaller window on screen, it results in much better responsiveness. A factor which you might find painful is that each level is a separate load. Blast through each fort, and the game will need to load the next level from the disc. This will eventually require you to flip the disc, as yes, this version spans 2 whole disc sides. Now for the Commodore 64 version. And yes, Ikari Warriors was one of those games to get releases in both the US and Europe as separate games. Though the solo-only option is unsurprising, the quality of the presentation certainly doesn't feel good. It might just be me, but seeing the default C64 character set on a title screen in a game released after 1984, it kind of lets my heart down. Things get even worse once you get started. Poor visuals, offering ugly colour choices, especially for the sprites which offer little detail. The backgrounds do fare better, though with the additional bonus of extending into the play area to trap unsuspecting players at times. Control-wise, you've got standard joystick controls for movement and firing, with the spacebar used to throw grenades. Once again, the loop lever isn't emulated here. You'll fire in the direction you're presently facing. And the grenades, they're a bit of a chore to use. Gunny placements only take damage if a grenade hits a very tiny area. so really it's easy to just avoid them, meaning the grenades are kinda useless as a result. And the same can also be said for the tanks, especially as when you hop in one, a fuel gauge is not presented on screen, so you can't quite plan for maximum tank usage as a result. But the biggest problem is in the stages. They're short, seriously short. And it's another surprise because whilst it means the game doesn't have to load between stages as its Apple II sibling does, it means the experience is ultimately brief. With the longevity here not coming from the design, but rather from the difficulty. And it's kind of funny that having so few enemies on screen at a time can be painful, but their hyperactive movement just makes it so. It really means that you're gonna just avoid them rather than trying to shoot them down. It truly is a diabolical conversion. Utterly diabolical. Now over to Europe, where Elite Systems obtained the license, publishing across the usual assortment of machines, from the Amstrad CPC in 1986 to the Amiga, Atari ST, ZX Spectrum, Commodore 64, and yes, even the Commodore C16 in 1988. Kicking off with the 16 bits and this Amiga version developed by Microwish, and right away, the presentation is on point, opening just like the arcade game. The visuals maintain the quality, feeling right up from there. The audio is primarily sample driven, which is quite a norm for Amiga games, and whilst it feels different as a result from that of the arcade game, it's still quite characteristic. A bit of an annoyance is hearing the sound effects cut out the music frequently. I wish things were set up to avoid this, but your mileage might vary on whether it's a minor niggle. The controls are a great win here. With a solitary button on its joysticks, you fire shots by tapping the fire button, toss grenades by holding it down. The loop lever controls are emulated by a single toggle key per player. Hit it once to lock your character in the direction you're presently facing, then once again to go back to facing in the direction you're moving. It's a great compromise in my book because it's easy to lock yourself in as required, but able to freely orientate yourself when not. The pacing holds up very well. You're battling a good swath of enemies, which keeps you really engaged as you try to carve your way through without losing too many of your lives. Thankfully, simultaneous 2-player support is on offer, and whilst I don't show it here, back in the day I remember having quite a great time with it as a result. Next we've got the humble ZX Spectrum. It may have had a complicated road to release, but this version developed by Paradise Software is great. The front end is a little sparse, but you've got plenty of customization on offer for both players. And yes, this means simultaneous 2-player support is on offer as well, with plenty of joystick options to boot. It utilises the same nifty mechanic for emulating the loop lever controls. Define a key for each player and tap it to lock or unlock the direction you're facing. It's really responsive as well. I never found myself being killed off due to these controls. Visually, they've worked with the Spectrum's colour limitations quite well. There are a few moments where you're not really going to be overwhelmed by the artistic choices, so the action is engaging and easy to get into. It also runs incredibly well. Even though this kind of near full screen intensive action is not a true strength of the Spectrum, it keeps to a consistent pace and is quite fun to play. The audio is a bit of a minor letdown, at least if you're playing on a 128K Spectrum. Whilst there's a nice rendition of the main theme on the title screen, once you get into the action, it's down to nothing but sound effects. I kind of feel that having the in-game music play would have been a neat touch, but it's a minor niggle and one not really worth complaining about. The Commodore 16 version is quite a surprising platform to release on, yet it kind of works. Whilst the colour palette choices can be a little out of place, the scrolling is smooth and the controls are very solid. One decision which is understandable but can be a pain is that you can only face forwards, but considering the memory restrictions on offer, I think it's something that can be let go. One thing I was really impressed with is that there's simultaneous 2-player support, even on the C16. Now, the audio is only just for plain sound effects, and this is a wise move because they do the job quite well. The TED's audio capabilities are never going to live up to those of the SID. So it does a solid job in giving you explosions, gunshots, and everything else you need to hear. Finally though, we're onto the Commodore 64 version, and let me tell you now, this is how you convert an arcade game over to home computers. You focus on the little things. Opening up with the introductory crash sequence, the 64 version is one of the few which actually includes it. Then that swisher track mode, alternating between the title screen, various in-game shots, and the usual high score and credits pages. Once the game starts, you'll be really impressed with its silky smooth scrolling. One detail I truly love with this version is how the status information for both players has been moved into the border. It frees up so much extra area for gameplay, and to top it off, also using the full screen width. It's not arcade accurate, but the extra room really helps make things less cramped in action. Visually, everything is clear, distinct, and well drawn. If there's a minor niggle, depending on your TV set, the tiny bullet sprites may clash with some of the backgrounds, but for the most part, you're running over dirt or water, and it's rare when you're fighting over grass. The sound is equally well suited. From the cassette version's loading theme to the renditions of the main themes, it's translated very well to the SID chip, helping you get even more engaged with the action therein. An excellent bonus is that whilst you've got options to toggle between silence, playing the music only, playing only the sound effects, or having them combined, the default is the latter, and they don't clash at all, which is really how things should fit together. Control-wise, as you'd expect from the other Elite conversions, each player has their own toggle key to lock and unlock their facing direction. And you guessed it, it's just as convenient as it is on the other machines. The joystick controls are responsive, easy to pick up, and clearly positioned toggle keys mean they're out of the way of each other and you don't have to battle over the keyboard in the heat of battle. Truly a stellar conversion on so many levels. Now for the first sequel, Victory Road. Debuting in 1986, Victory Road is a sequel which doesn't try to travel down the same road again, as you and a friend are now taken into space for a more fantastic battle after being whisked away by some bothersome aliens. In terms of mechanics, you'll find a lot in common here, as whilst you're in space, you'll be running out blasting aliens, throwing grenades, and all of the same business. The biggest change is the obvious removal of the tanks, now replaced with suits of armour. There are also some differences with the power-ups, alternate weapons, and being shown off right from the start, alongside ones to clear the screen of enemies too. One touch I loved was the destructible scenery. It's a small touch, but watching it become battle-scarred as you play your way through makes quite an interesting sign of progression indeed. Now these home computer versions. The first round of releases was once again in the USA, once again published by Data East, with conversion duties by Quicksilver Software, for the Apple II, Commodore 64, and DOS PCs. You might know where this is going. The Apple II one opens up with a nice, colourful surprise. Using the enhanced capabilities of the Apple IIe and IIc platforms and their double high-resolution graphics mode, it certainly is more vibrant. Now, once you pick your control option and the game loads in, it leads into one very big problem. The speed. Sure, you have far more vibrant visuals here, especially compared to the first game, but action games really have to be fast to be playable. It's got flow-on effects, especially impacting the audio, which makes it quite horrific as a result. With the machine struggling to keep up, the audio becomes incredibly choppy and it's irritating to listen to. Control-wise, you have the same setup here, a choice between the analog joystick or a keyboard setup with individual keys for each direction. Once again, the loop lever isn't emulated here, meaning you can only fire in the direction you're moving in. This is a more problematic choice because of the tighter play area. You'll be dodging between various buildings, and with the inability to rotate, you'll be at quite a disadvantage in dispatching enemies. Now for the C64 version, and after Quicksilver's take on the first game, I wasn't really expecting much. If there's one improvement at least, the tile screen is a little nicer this time around, though not by much. The visuals sadly still aren't great. The sprites retain their bland palette choices and poor definitions, and whilst the backgrounds offer a little more colour from the new locales, it's really about what's most interesting to it. The music is as flat and lifeless as before, and whilst it doesn't clash with the sound effects, I do wish you could mute one or the other. One little surprise is the sampled speech heard when you start a level, but hearing the same clip played over and over again really gets repetitive incredibly quickly. Speaking of levels though, where everything was contained in a single load with the first game, for Victory Road you'll find you need to load each of them from disk. It's not a lengthy wait thankfully, but it means levels do offer a bit more to them as well. So how does it actually play? It's no surprise to say the flaws from Quicksilver's adaptation of the first game ring just as true here. The pacing, the controls, the hyperactive enemies, everything which made that first game such a waste of time is present here, and even the new tricks like the end of level bosses just don't help at all. Over in Europe, Victory Road wouldn't see a home release until 1989, picked up by Ocean, who once again published it on their Imagine label for everything but the C64. Starting out with the ZX Spectrum version, again developed by Paradise Software, and you guessed it, things are going to be okay here. As with Ikari Warriors, you've got options for simultaneous 2-player support, alongside a multitude of joystick and control options. Most importantly though, the loop lever is emulated just as you'd expect. The return of the toggle key. Now a lot of things which apply to Paradise's conversion of the first game applies here too. The visuals are clear without much colour clash. The pacing of the action is nice and solid, meaning you can easily get engaged and want to continue playing through. The controls work great, feeling solid and responsive. The sound once again features AY sound effects for 128K spectrums, though the lack of music is always a bit of a bummer here as well. It is a minor niggle, so your mileage may vary on that front. But now we've got the Amiga version, once again converted by Microwish. I would like to say that, as per the Spectrum version, being handled by the devs of the first game, that the same would apply here. It does not. There are some positives. Simultaneous 2-player support is present as expected, the controls work well, and emulating the loop lever with a key to lock and unlock the direction you're facing happens to work as well. But those are overwhelmed by the negatives. So many negatives. The biggest step back is in the visuals. With the introduction of the side graphic art, and the machines only having 16 colours, this gobbles up a large chunk of slots in the palette, which limits the available colours for the main action. Making it look kind of muddy and ugly. Then you've got the horrendous pacing. Though I was playing this on a slightly accelerated Amiga 500, the pacing was much more sluggish than in the first game. It honestly results in the game not being at all engaging to play. It's such a drain. An existential drain as you walk up with this pacing and just battling the same generic aliens. It's just no fun. One thing I actually did enjoy though was Fred Gray's music. Whilst it's a stylistic choice to go for a more chip-tuned sound over the more sample-heavy pieces which the Amiga is better known for, I found it quite listenable. Though honestly, I would probably want to hunt it out elsewhere instead of sitting through the game itself. The final installment, Ikari III: The Rescue, debuted in arcades in 1989. It's got one significant diversion for the series, where instead of running up the screen taking on waves of enemy soldiers with heavy weaponry, you're now on a mission to rescue the president's daughter, armed with nothing but your fists and combat boots. That's right, Ikari III is a beat-em-up. An overcomplicated one to the control of that. Well, at least it's how I feel with the adaptation in the Anniversary Collection. so it's one I just really didn't get into. It's such a drastic diversion in gameplay, and the unique selling point of the controls make the game a mess to play, at least in its arcade form, making it a bit of a failed experiment in my eyes. When it comes to the home versions, SNK themselves would publish it in 1990 for both the Commodore 64 and DOS PCs in the USA. On booting the C64 version up, it opens with an okay take on the arcade game's intro, offering support for separate music or sound effects, and yes, 1 or 2 players. With more on offer than the previous games in the series, it really does mean you're going to see a lot of loading between levels. Though, at least with the version I was playing, the waits weren't too bad. Once the action begins, however, you're in for a bit of a shock, with all the chunky pixels on screen. With the arcade game featuring larger character sprites, the artists here have decided to go for the same approach on the C64 version, and the first impressions may lead you to believe that it's a bit of an outright mess. In contrast though, background visuals, they're fine. They're not great, especially compared to other C64 games of the era, but they're functional and do the job. The music is a bit of a mixed bag. Some of the tracks are listenable, while others are kind of jarring. Again, it's one of those subjective cases, but I can't think of many late-era C64 games from the US which had soundtracks on par with those higher-profile European games of the time. One big upside though is the controls. Seriously. The simplifications needed to fit the control scheme on the C64's single-button joystick means it's far less unwieldy in combat, which is a bit of a surprise, honestly. The action itself is quite formulaic. Move until you reach a choke point, battle a bunch of thugs, then continue. The map will change directions at various points of the level, and the stage where you're navigating a river system becomes quite interesting in that regard. Though along the way you're going to battle tougher thugs, but you'll also run into encounters with tanks and helicopters. You won't be handling these battles with your bare fists. Instead, you'll be grabbing some heavy-duty firepower from a conveniently placed guard. The stages themselves are broken up with cutscenes, which offer some explanation on the story but also serve as a nice break from the fighting. I'll admit, the story is actually kind of interesting with a few twists and turns, but it's still generic enough all up that it's not enough to drive you through the game. Well, at least that's how I see it. So, there we have it. Oh, so many ports of the Ikari Warriors trilogy to so many home computer systems. Starting with the first game, I was rather impressed with the Apple II conversion. It certainly punched above its weight here with fluid visuals and solid pacing. Like many games on the Apple II though, if you can get to grips with the keyboard or joystick controls, you're going to have a bit of fun with this one, even if you can't bring a friend along for the ride. The Commodore 16 version was quite a surprise as well. It's really quite a competent conversion despite the memory limitations. Now, whilst many Commodore 16 conversions tended to be rush jobs with minimal resemblance to the source material, this one at least has the feel of Ikari Warriors, if not necessarily the full gameplay. Microwish's Amiga version certainly stands out as the most technically accomplished port featured in this video, with near arcade quality visuals, a more detailed soundtrack, and more. Despite its cramped playing area and the sound effects cutting into the music, it most importantly plays quite well, and is one worth spending some time on. The ZX Spectrum version was another great surprise as well. Like the Apple II version, it certainly punches above its weight here, offering tight controls, plenty of customization options for its 2-player mode, and well-designed visuals minimising colour clash. It's a wonderful conversion which really feels quite at home on the humble machine. Finally, we have the two Commodore 64 conversions, serving as two sides of the same coin. Data East's US published conversion is horrendous to play through, offering ugly visuals, sluggish controls, a terrible soundtrack, and really some major tedium in play as a result. By the standards of 1986, it is quite a lackluster experience, and has dated incredibly poorly since then. All of this makes Elite's European release that much more incredible. That these two conversions are running on the exact same computer really is mind-blowing. There may be timing differences involved, but you can see some true C64 mastery here, which shouldn't be a surprise with the conversion authored by John Twitty, the coder of many great titles over the years. The visuals are crisp and detailed, the scrolling smooth, the controls are tight, and the audio is great. With excellent gameplay, it's a conversion you'll seriously be engaged with for quite a long time to come. The journey down Victory Road offers many challenges, and both Data East conversions are quite disappointing here. I wasn't really surprised at how poor the C64 version was, especially coming off Quicksilver's work on the first game. Sure, you have the sampled speech before each level, but the level multiloads really impact the flow. The visuals are just as poor here as they are in the first game, looking bland and featureless. The music follows in the same vein, once again being flat, lifeless, and not very engaging at all. In fact, at the end of it, there's nothing here which can be redeemed with this one. Nothing at all. The Apple II version is a much tougher disappointment to swallow. Whilst not revolutionary, I enjoyed the conversion of the first game, and Victory Road just doesn't live up to it at all. All of this really stems from the choice to use the double high-res mode of the Apple II. Whilst it may look prettier, it comes at such a major cost to the pacing. It also results in the audio being pain-inducing, utterly pain-inducing. Really as a result of this pacing. That's all I have to say about it. Maybe it's a conversion for one of those running accelerated Apple II hardware. Now, Imagine's conversions are quite an interesting story as well. On the ZX Spectrum side of the fence, Paradise Software delivered quite a solid conversion. It's fluid, easy to control, playable, and offers clear visuals. For a machine like the Spectrum, it really does a solid and dependable job. The fact they were able to adapt their work from the first game so well really shows the similarities between the two designs, and it results in an enjoyable enough conversion. It's an utter shame that I can't say the same for Microwish's Amiga conversion. This one is a big step backwards on so many levels. From the jerky scrolling, the ugly colour palette on the visuals, and the dull pace of the gameplay, it's one I just wasn't engaged with at all. The only positive with this version is its music, and that honestly could be quite divisive. And finally, we've got Ikari III. Like with Athena in the previous episode, it's an arcade game which left me quite cold, honestly. Whereas Athena had terrible game design, Ikari III was really about the overcomplicated controls. In ditching them, the 64 version plays just that little bit better, though it still suffers from the fundamental tedium in its game design. Quicksilver did a much better job here than their previous conversions, but at the end of the day, it's not one of those games I can really see myself coming back to, because the gameplay is just not engaging to me on a core, fundamental level. And now, we've finally done it. We've made it to the end of this little series. Whilst a rapid-fire exploration of these games probably won't be the norm, regardless, I hope you enjoyed it and got inspired to try out a few games for yourself. Especially if you want to take the chance to widen your horizons a bit. I think it'd sometimes be more rewarding than you think. If you happen to have a pick of this or from the previous episode, do let me know in the comments. Otherwise, thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to catch you on the next Beyond the Scanlines. I really am glad to have finished this series. It was quite the challenge to put together, especially over anything else I've done so far. So if you enjoyed it, please do hit the thumbs up. It really means a lot. Other than that, all I really wanted to say was, once again, thank you all so very much for watching and for your support.